Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I am with Gini von Quarter. Got that right this time? And we are going to be talking all about analytics. So to give you some context, she's got a huge following on LinkedIn, and she's probably one of the most well-established analytics educators. I mean, her Power BI course has what, over 100,000 students at this point?
Yeah, at least.
So I mean, that is just huge numbers. So you're just having this huge impact. And I think, your voice carries some weight behind it. So how are you surviving the COVID crisis?
Well, pretty well. I think I was working at home before. I mean, I'm in my house, in my studio, so my work hasn't changed. And that's been a really good thing because there are people who don't have work at all right now.
Right.
And need to be looking for work or gearing up to look for work, which this is a good time to do.
I was going to say that this is the perfect opportunity to upskill.
Yeah, it's a perfect time to learn new things. And I'm learning some new things too, but my basic work hasn't changed. And then I have friends who are working like crazy because they still have work, but they're trying to do the work that they did before using tools like, virtual meeting tools that don't necessarily translate one-to-one. You can't always do a 1 hour in-person meeting in a 1 hour Teams meeting or a 1 hour Zoom meeting, or there's a lot of, time with people catching up. And then there's also that work just has taken over their whole lives. So I have friends who aren't working at all. I have friends who are working 20 hours a day, and
Wow.
Both of those things are happening. I'm working about like I have always worked. And we've been stay at home here now for, I think we're going into week 4 here in Michigan. And that's been good. I think it's been good for more people to be able to be at home. But I'm pretty fortunate because I think, I'm pretty fortunate. Let's just leave it there.
Yeah.
How are you doing? Doing?
I'm doing fine. I mean, unfortunately, my consulting side of my revenue stream is completely shut down, but, hopefully that's going to pick right back up. I mean, it's not like, these consulting engagements are terminated. They're just on pause. But, I'm working on a new Power BI course. I'm still doing the podcast. I mean, it's
cool.
Kind of a mixed bag. I think that the podcast is probably going to get more views because more people are going to have the free time to start looking at, maybe making a career change into the analytics space. So yeah, I mean, I'm hanging in there.
But I'm similar to you in a couple of ways because my institutional clients don't have time for training right now. I mean, any training that I was doing that was directed towards a company, that's not what they're doing. But I think for individuals right now, particularly for individuals who are either between jobs, right, or who are in their current job are realizing that they could bring more value and they have a little bit of extra downtime or slack time. This is a brilliant time, as you pointed out, to upscale.
Right. And also, too, one of the cool things about working in the analytics space is you can work remotely. I mean, if you have access to the, databases or whatever Excel files, you can do that from home. And I think we may see a huge shift in work-life culture where if a company can see that, a third of my workforce doesn't have to have office space, that's less overhead.
Right.
So, I mean, I was talking to the owner of a business here in Greensboro, and he was saying he thinks the reason that we haven't had this shift to a more remote culture is because a lot of business owners have a hard time understanding, like, what is the value of my employee or how productive are they? And they're worried that if they're not, kind of looking over their shoulder, that they're just not going to work. And I think this is a perfect time to prove that, if you can work remotely, now is the time to document your time and actually show that you are more productive at home, if that's what you want, if you want to work remotely.
I also think that, as well as maybe another way I would restate a piece of what you just said is that there are people in management and supervision who don't know whether they have the skills to manage a remote workforce or to supervise people working from home.
Interesting.
I mean, that's the other side of that equation. It's not, sometimes I don't know what they're doing or I don't know if they'll be productive. Well, there are ways you could know that, but it's a different set of supervisory and management skills than what you have for a workforce that's on site. And I'll do a little tiny plug here because, you know, a month ago, LinkedIn Learning opened up a whole bunch of courses for free use during this outbreak, during this global pandemic. And one of them is a course on how to supervise employees who are working remotely, because it is different to do that. If you haven't supervised a remote team, I know the first time that I had to supervise you know, a global team, I had people who worked in different countries and different time zones. That was a new experience for me. And I didn't have a choice whether I was going to do that or not. I think, you know, executives have had a choice to be able to supervise their people on site. And when they don't have, like you said, there's a possibility that this will create a culture change. I saw a meme yesterday that said, you know, what most drove the change in, or who most drove the change in your company's work from home culture? And choice A was CEO, choice 2 was like CIO, and choice 3 was COVID-19. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now it does seem like the perfect time. Well, kind of getting to that point of what are some of the skills in the analytics space? I think you mentioned that, you know, I feel like a lot of people are kind of almost like tech elitists, and they really discount Excel. But you were saying that you feel like Excel needs to be that foundation.
Well, I think that this, first of all, there's more corporate data living in Excel than in anything else. Whether it's good data or bad data, that's another entire question. And actually something that you have a podcast about with Oz Du Soleil, right? A whole conversation about how good is the data, right?
Right.
But Excel was the great democratizer of what had previously been mainframe data. You couldn't necessarily have access to the data in an organization, but you could talk your DBA into downloading some Excel files for you, and people learned from there. I think that because there are so many Excel users in not just in corporate America, but around the globe, if you talk Excel, so to speak, if you can create meaningful analysis in Excel, that's a great start to do anything else. There are certainly things that we can do in all of the other tools, in Tableau and Power BI, that are far beyond what we can do in Excel. But Excel is a great jumping off place. And Excel is an invitational place for other people. If I wanted to create something to show what was possible in data analytics for the CFO of an organization or the CEO, putting it in Excel actually is pretty comfortable for them. They go, oh, we could do that. And it's like, yeah, and if you start there, then we can move on from there. The other thing that I think is important about Excel, beyond just the sheer number of users and the fact that it is, that it provided that bridge early on to other data. We don't need it for that anymore, but it provided that, is that it's respected. You just don't see people saying, oh, it's an Excel, so don't believe it. I've never heard that in my life. You know, Excel has a built-in trustworthiness for a lot of users. And so there's a piece there of people might be skeptical of something that you show them that you created in another tool. But if you created it in Excel, the odds are pretty good that they're going to say, oh, okay, it's Excel. And there's an ease about it. Again, that's a little tiny cultural thing, but I think it's a good reason. If I were starting again with data analytics, I would be starting with Excel again. It's not quite where I started. I'll age myself a little bit by saying I actually started with Microsoft Multiplan, which was a really crappy spreadsheet product. Okay. Wow. And then, yeah, really bad. That was the competition for Lotus 1-2-3, which was an incredibly expensive product. I mean, 30 years ago, we were paying $300 a copy for Lotus 1-2-3. It's just nuts. I can buy 5 whole household licenses for Microsoft 365 for 3 years for that amount of money. So it wasn't approachable, right? And they didn't give an educational discount when I was a teacher. So I couldn't outfit a classroom with Lotus. When Excel showed up, it was the best thing I had ever seen, the best piece of software I'd ever seen. And that was probably true right up until Power BI.
Interesting. Well, it's really interesting that you mentioned the CFO, because I'm actually working with the former CFO of Wrangler Jeans now, and I've joined the advisory council for Greensboro College about a year and a half ago, and I'm going to be teaching data visualization in the capstone there. And just 2 days ago, I had the head of their certification department reach out to me about putting together either a analytics certification process or a boot camp. And he was the first person I called, because so his name's Nathan Carter, and he's a really interesting character in that. So he's worked in years and years and years in financial analysis, which honestly, that's kind of my weak suit. So, I do mostly sales and marketing, and I've kind of built my, data visualization around that. But I also have a very strong data visualization bias. And he was saying, because my initial thoughts for him were like, yeah, what we should do is have a 3-month semester where, I find a company to partner with, and we pull their Excel data into Tableau and, solve a real life business problem while also hitting all the points on the desktop specialist certification. So they graduate with a piece of experience and then also a certification proving that and he was like, no, pause. You need to start with Excel. And because that is really the foundation, because a lot of specifically CFOs, they actually don't really speak data visualization. They want to see tabular data,
numbers,
which is
they want to see numbers.
That kind of just blew my mind, because I started off my career as a Tableau specialist, so that kind of opened up my mind and my perspective a little bit. So what would you say?
Go ahead.
So what would you say are like, because he talked through some of like the key aspects of Excel that are important. I would love to get your take on it, because we all have our limitations in terms of perspective. He's mostly in financial analysis, but I'm sure you've taught across like all different departments, all different industries. What would you say are the key features of Excel that an entry-level analyst should know?
Wow. Okay, so first you need to know how you can get data into Excel, from the ability to connect to data, whether that data is on the web or that data is in a database. Excel allows you to create those connections, and you might as well learn how to do it in Excel. You're going to do it a little differently when you're using something like Tableau or Power BI, but just to be able to connect to data sources in Excel is of itself important if you want to work with corporate data. The next skill I think is important are all of the skills that have to do with formatting as a table. And I don't particularly like that Microsoft called it format, but it really is taking a data set and saying, this is my database. Here are my fields. They're in columns. Here are my records. They're in rows. And then using the tools that are packaged along with that, and that is going to pour you right into pivot tables, so that you have the ability to do easily in Excel what's something that's really hard to do in a database. And in most databases, that's a crosstab analysis. And they're not necessarily easy conceptually, but when you do them in Excel, pivot tables, they make sense. Then you can take those skills, if you needed, for example, to work directly in with a database and say, okay, if you conceptually understand pivot tables, you're going to conceptually understand crosstab analysis. So it's a much kinder entry point.
Can you define crosstab analysis?
Okay, so a crosstab analysis is being able to take information, transactional information that you have in rows, okay, records of data. So let's imagine that we have customer information, okay? We have the date that they last purchased something. We have their demographics, their name, their address, city, state, zip code, and perhaps we have their date of birth for whatever bizarre reason. Let's say we have those things. And so we want to be able to ask questions about that data, like, is there any kind of a link between where someone lives and how old they are? Or is there any kind of a link between where someone lives and the last time they purchased from us? And perhaps we even know when they purchased, did they purchase on-site or online? So is there a link between age and online ordering? So all of those kinds of questions where we're taking in a table one column of data and comparing it to the values in another in a way that actually ties those things together. Because it's not as if we're just going to take a column of birth dates and a column of purchasing behavior separately. We actually want those tied together. And that's the cross in the crosstab, I think, is the fact that we know that we're talking about a record where an individual made a purchase and they made it online, and that person has an age because they have a birth date. So if you take all of that information, then we can create a table that says, based by age in years or in decades, this is the pattern of people shopping in person or online, for example. So a crosstab analysis is the ability to take information in a table, record-based information, and extract out of that meaningful answers to questions. You know, and that's what a pivot table is too. It's exactly the same thing. It's just that with a pivot table, it's so easy in Excel. Excel makes this abundantly easy to simply, if I wanted to do that in Excel, I could have created pivot tables to answer all of those questions that I kind of pitched out in the time that we've talked about it. So starting with Excel, starting with how we get data into Excel, how we use the database functions, how we craft pivot tables, and then depending on, and how you create charts. Charts are just a good thing in Excel to be able to visualize data. They're, you know, when you're talking about your CFO who really wants to see numbers, if he wants to see charts, if a CFO wants to see charts, they also don't want those three-dimensional charts because they exaggerate some things to make them look three-dimensional. The data points on a 3D pie are overstated because they're closer to you and they're bigger. And one of the CFOs that I used to work with would rant about any chart that was three-dimensional at all. He'd go, flatten it out. If you're going to give me a picture, flatten it out.
Well,
because that's at least what makes
pie charts are sacrilegious in the data visualization space.
Oh, no kidding. No kidding.
There's so many articles and videos about why a pie chart is a terrible way to represent data, because our eyes don't process information that way. You know, you want a standardized axis, and then you can see, like a bar chart, you can see differences between lengths. Our eyes can't process, oh, that's a 43-degree angle, and that's a 56-degree angle. You know, this is the one. I mean, you can kind of see that it's, you know, it's taking up more space, but, you know, pie charts are not, but I mean, that gets into actually what we were talking about with that, you know, potential data boot camp is I think we should start with an Excel course that kind of primes you on thinking like an analyst. So a crosstab, essentially what you're doing is you're finding insights within the data. So you need that foundation.
Correct.
But then once you've found that in insight, you need to be able to tell that story. And I think that there should be maybe, I don't know if it should be a full course, or should it be like the intro section of a data visualization course where you learn the hard skills, but there's an art of presenting data. And that's kind of an art, and it's a, you know, it's a craft. It's and I mean, that's what kind of drew me to it, is that it's creative. It's both analytical and creative. And I love that combination. So that kind of sums up my personality. You know, I do have an eye for aesthetics, but I also really like thinking analytically. And I'm wondering if that is something, I wonder if, you know, if that's a nature nurture thing. I wonder, you know, how did I develop that? Because it seems like I somewhat intuited that analytical thinking ability well before I took any analytics classes.
Well, I think there are, I don't want to say, I might say personality types, but that might be wrong. I think that but I think that for everybody who ends up in data analytics, at some point they feel like there was a natural path that got them there. You know, that things that they had done previously in their life got them to the point that data analytics was the thing that made sense. I see the same thing from folks who do CGI work, computer graphics work. It's like they can tell you all the little steps of things that they learned that drew them in that direction. So I think there's a quality of thought and a quality of patience, as well as just a desire that when you start creating really great analytics, when you start creating, the first truly beautiful visualization you do that you go, wow, did I do that? You're either hooked at that point or you're not, So I think it is, when you said, that it's both the creative side and the more quantitative side, and I agree with that. And then you said, and then you have, that you're a good designer. For me, if I need great design, I rent it out anymore because that's the part that I'm least good at. I'm really great at presenting. I'm really great at analyzing data. I'm really great at deciding what the story should be. What's the best story from this data? Mm-hmm. But ultimately, and maybe it's because I need to invest more time in it, I'm not sure, but I know other people create things that are more beautiful than I create, given the same data. And I just have always kind of figured that was a little missing piece of me and I'll look at it and I'll go, that could be more beautiful. I need to call a friend. Mm-hmm. Where's my lifeline?
It's funny. I feel like we're kind of the opposite in that aspect, in that I don't know if I've articulated kind of my career or this specific concept before, but it's almost like I crowdsource the way of the analytical thinking paths through my consulting agency. So I'll have a case study or I'll have a consulting engagement, and it's like, oh, this is what the CMO wanted to look at. These were the important data points. And, oh, the CFO, mm-hmm. They want, harder numbers. They don't want as much visualization. So it's like, I'm almost like how you were outsourcing that design. I'm outsourcing that analytical thinking path. But also too, part of it is I'm 31. I haven't worked in industry as an executive for 15 years. So who am I to like say this is the best way of thinking? So it's I don't even think it's I was almost going to say it's almost like I'm stealing their thunder, but I don't think that
no.
It doesn't harm them. It's not like a zero-sum game. It's like I get to see.
Correct.
Getting back to how I fostered my relationship with Nathan. So he reached out to me about partnering on a Power BI project, and that fell through. But I sit on the board of directors for a local nonprofit, and he casually mentioned that he's interested in learning more about the nonprofit space. So I brought him in, got the board to, vote on him coming in. And now he and I are working on the budget for, it's a small nonprofit, but I'm getting to see how he thinks about it. And it's like, I'm building out these frameworks that I'm seeing, where, your foot hits the pavement. I'm seeing like it in action. And I also think that's like a huge gap in my personal education. So like in the classes I took, through university, I did not see that level of learning. And I don't know if you can do that in a classroom setting.
You can do some of it in a classroom setting. I think in terms of thinking about finance, one of the more helpful courses I took, and it was an undergrad course, was a course on managerial accounting. Because it's how managers should think about accounting and how accounting is created. That is not about, it's not the income statement, right, and the balance sheet. It's really trying to figure out what's the contribution margin, what's all of these different margins and that allow you to take a look at your business and how do we place the business in the larger environment. So there are courses that help teach some parts and pieces of that. I'm heavy on the finance side. If I'd taken one more course in my undergrad, I could have gone on to sit my CPA exam later on. And I have a master's degree in business that's also very finance heavy. So I don't have my shortage isn't there. I've had a lot of time in healthcare. That's kind of nice right now. A lot of the models that I build tend to be public health models that I use in my courses, or historical models. I'm really interested in, totally fascinated by historical data by looking at data and going, wow, I never knew that. Sort of interesting things. The work, that body of work that lives on Gapminder, that, that Hans, and I'm going to get his name wrong, so I should just not say this, but University of Sweden, Hans Rosling, I think, if I get it right, fabulous TED Talk. We lost him a couple of years ago, but there's an interesting, and it's a data analytics story is what I would say, is he was teaching, and I'm not sure exactly what his subject matter was, somewhere in the social sciences, maybe economics. And he asked students in his courses to answer 4 questions about the world, where he would take 2 countries, South Korea and Sweden, and say, which country has, the higher infant mortality rate? 4 different questions about comparing 2 countries in the world. And so it's one of 2 choices, right? And he said, if I had written on one banana, South Korea, and on the other banana, Sweden, a group of monkeys would have been right half the time. Whatever banana, see what I mean?
Yeah.
Whatever banana they grab first, monkeys would have been right half the time. And this is the insight that is amazing to me, this next piece. This is purely a how you think about the world insight. His students were right 25% of the time. And he said,
wow,
that's not chance. They think they know something that's not true. Okay, for the scores to consistently be that low, it proved the non-existence, right, of actual information, because monkeys would have done twice as good.
Wow.
As students, right? Isn't that, so for me, there's a huge data analysis moment, is learning about something that because randomly, you're way out of the range of what a random number would have been. Yeah. And you do, but more than that, I don't care about random anymore. My question is, do you do half as good as monkeys? So anyway, he then created this huge data science project where he pulls in all of this information from all of these organizations all over the world, so that you can go and get access to data on just a wide range of information about countries, whether it's, hospitalizations, whether it's the age of people in the country, whether it's their gross domestic product, their gross national product, but this huge amount of data. And it's on a site called gapminder.org. And it's freely available to people to use. That fascinates me. And his belief was that if more and more people were using data analytics to model information, real world information, that we would actually learn things about each other rather than having assumptions that are, again, half as accurate as the random acts of chimpanzees and bananas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a fun little anecdote. Huh.
Yeah. So I use Gapminder data in a couple of my courses on LinkedIn.org because there's such a rich amount of data that's available.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, okay, getting back to your courses, one of the things that you kind of wanted to talk about was, okay, we established that Excel is the foundation that you should start with. Then you said,
yep, I think so. You think so?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and then you said Power BI, Excel has been the best thing since Power BI. So how can you make that transition from Excel into Power BI, which, shameless plug, that's the name of one of my courses on LinkedIn.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, so there is a course to help you do this. And certainly you're the expert on this. I think that for people who worked, it depends. That's what I'd say. It depends. If in the work that you've done in Excel, you've gone a little past 2 things. In the data acquisition stage, if one of the things you chose to do was to use Power Query as part of the way you retrieve data, you have an instant portal into Power BI, because Power BI has had 2 big iterations. The first iteration of Power BI you could think of as Power BI being a bunch of tools that worked out of Excel. So we had, Power Query, we had Power Map, these different tools that were available to us that's sort of built on OLAP cubes and the query abilities that were written for those. So there were a lot of people who used Power BI Gen 1, and that was replaced several years ago with a Power BI package that includes, other tools, but everything is more integrated. But the Power Query that we work with in Power BI is the same Power Query that you can work with in Excel. I mean, there's no significant difference. So if you're already querying out of Excel, that gives you an instant door. But I think if you haven't, did you want to ask something?
So just in case there's someone who's brand new to analytics, can you define what is a query?
Oh my, we're working hard here. So a query is, queries come to us out of the analytics world and out of the database world. A query is when you want to retrieve some data from a source, and it's a specification for how that data will be retrieved. So at its very simplest, a query might be, see that table over there, give me all the data in the way that it appears. That's about the simplest query you can write. It's pull the data. But on the way in, and particularly in Excel, because in Excel you have a limitation in terms of the number of rows you can have and the number of columns. I mean, it's huge, but it's still a limitation. And if you're pulling from a data source, that's large in and of itself, you really want to be able to trim down what you get. So you have a choice. Let's say I had access to all of the transactions that were done on loyalty cards for, imagine all the grocery stores in Michigan. And by the way, that's not even all of them. A couple of the big chains would be terabytes and terabytes of data, okay? So I can't put that on my laptop. I can't even easily load that into the biggest desktop that we have kicking around. So how do I then choose the data that's coming in so it doesn't overwhelm me? And so every time I click on something, I don't watch it redraw and just have to go out and cook a meal while I wait.
Right.
So, right, so the way you do that is, instead of saying, there's that table, give it all to me, you provide some parameters around what you actually do want. So if I were doing an analysis, for example, for one chain, Myers is a grocery that's in Michigan, a grocery chain, and I had access to the data for all the stores, I might say, but just give me Meijer. Or if I only wanted to do an analysis for Meijer on the west side of the state, I would say, just give me Meijer from zip code, this zip code to that zip code. And just give me the data for sales in the last 30 days. All of those pieces of information, those parameters, can be added to the query, so that rather than pulling back huge number of records that I don't need. Oh, and I can also say, and by the way, I could care less about how it was paid for. I can discard entire columns of data that I don't care about. So one of the things that you can learn in Excel, or you can learn in Power BI, but you need to learn it somewhere, is how to figure out what data it is you don't need, and to ask for the data that you do require. Because if you're dragging around extra data every time you turn around, everything gets slower.
Right.
Everything takes more time. And worse than that, when you're creating data models, I think that many people who've asked to have data from another system, can you give this to me in Excel? Can you give me this information? Have at some point run across a database administrator who said, sure, and they've just dumped it all out. And you have all these columns with weird names. You don't know what the heck they are. Why does this data set look like it has duplicate columns, which it would never have if it were well constructed and well designed? Mm-hmm. You take a look at that and you say, wow, this is a mess. How do I deal with this? Well, as we're creating data models, I think increasingly the data analytics role is growing from, I'm going to be your one-stop shop, and I look at your data and I hand you back reports and visualizations and dashboards. And, I think it's shifting from there very intentionally, okay, because to be blunt, there aren't enough of us for the data, right? Mm-hmm. There aren't enough people to do all of that work for the data. And the other thing is, then we have to do a lot of requirements gathering from the business about, so what do you want to visualize? What's in the report?
I know exactly where
There's
you're
a
headed.
place in Power BI for consumers, right? For people who just want to use incredibly well-designed data models. And so it doesn't matter that in the database that's designed, every text field starts with a lowercase txt or S for string or whatever the thing was at your company. That's not helpful to the business user. The business user doesn't need to see a bunch of encoding that is about our data model. They need to see a data model that they understand. So the ability to create strong data models that we can hand to the business so that they can be creating some visualizations, and then they may come back to us and say, hey, how would we make this look better? Or am I doing with this what I should be doing? Mm-hmm. And we can't create foolproof data models, but we can certainly create data models that don't make our users feel like fools. You know,
You're touching on data democratization.
Oh, yes. Yeah, because, you know, I've spent a lot of my career doing business analytics just because that's what you have to do. You know, if you're designing a system for somebody has to be going out and interviewing users and developing use cases. And, you know, I'm kind of user friendly, so that was often a role that I've had. Even if I was a project manager, I'd be out gathering requirements myself and documenting those requirements. And the users are the people who actually know about the business. I may know about how their data is being set up, but they're the people who actually know the questions that they want to have answers to. That doesn't mean they know every question. As data analysts, we get insight into data that regular users, that end users sometimes don't get. And part of that has been, so here's a limitation of Excel, okay? And I'm sure you've seen this as well. Organizations that have beautiful transactional data, okay, about years of their work. But for some, well, and because Excel used to only let you have a smaller number of rows and a smaller number of columns, they learned to parse that into individual worksheets. So you have a worksheet for, in a hospital system, one for each hospital. And then you have a worksheet for each hospital for each year. And what gets lost in that is comparative data between the hospitals and between the years. So you have people who really have a business cycle and don't even know that it exists, and it's because their data has been so separated for so long, right? There's the power of Power BI right there. In a nutshell, would be the ability to pull all of that data together, not even to physically pull it together, but to create a data model that spans years, that spans the individual business units, so that you could have some insights that you can't have when your focus is tight this way and tight this way. And Power BI has the ability to easily do that. Now, you can do that in Excel with Power Query as well, but I just don't see a lot of people doing it. And one of the things that I push on whenever I'm talking to people about how they're going to use their data, when I'm teaching Excel to institutional clients, to, you know, universities or to, you know, large companies or to a hospital association, I'm asking, can you tell me again why the heck it is you're separating your data? Because you can sort and filter on both of those columns, both of those variables, and keep all your data in one place. The idea that big data means you can't parcel it out into little chunks, that you lose something simply by cutting it up, you lose the ability to know things about your business, is a key concept in how data is organized that has not caught on yet. Or I wouldn't have to be saying this over and over and over again. You know, when somebody asks me, so Gini, how do I take this spreadsheet and I want to reuse it now next year? We have a new book next year. And I go, wait, why? Why do you have a new book next year? Well, it's because that's how management wants it. And I go, does management know what they give up when they do that? And the answer, of course, is that often the person I'm talking to doesn't feel like they're in a position to be delivering that news.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of
part of my consulting agency is, well, because now I've switched from doing just project work to I'm now pitching a 3-month retainer. And then instead of just coming in and doing data visualization. So I kind of came at this from the front end. So they would just send me their data and I would visualize it and find insights. I didn't really understand their data structure at all, but now my personal growth trajectory has been learn data visualization and then back into the database end of it. But I'm realizing now that just doing the data visualization work is a very small pie, because I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot if I'm just a visualization specialist, because if the data is a mess, then it doesn't matter how good I am at data visualization, because they don't even trust the data. So now I'm kind of pitching a 3-month process where, number one, we talk about data governance and data quality. And a lot of that, it's almost like I'm a data therapist, where you will have the person who owns the data process, and sometimes they're, mid-level or, mid-senior level, but they don't feel like they have the authority or the sway to talk to the CEO and say, look, all of this is wrong and we need to address these issues. So I'm almost like having group data therapy sessions where it's like, okay, Anna, what's wrong with the data? Oh, did you realize the CEO? And then, I'm almost like the facilitator, and the fact that they're bringing me in as a subject matter expert, they're spending, a relatively high dollar amount on me. So they feel like, okay, well, I need to take his advice or I'm just throwing money away. So that is a really interesting point of someone. Actually, this is an interesting question. Have you run across organizations where nobody owns the data process or understands the database?
Yes.
So I haven't hit that yet. So I'm lucky.
Oh yeah. I've run across it in a lot of different ways. I've run across, we had an outside firm set up, design our database, and they're out of business. They're no longer with us. We don't have any clue why they did what they did. What we know is that anytime we've gone in and changed one little thing, it's broken, it's broken the user interface over here. We can't afford to have somebody come back in and do that. It's just, so yeah, I've seen a lot of that. Back in the days when there were a lot of people doing access databases, that was sort of the democratizing tool, we thought, because Excel wasn't going to be enough. So you don't have time for SQL Server. Your IT department's too busy. So every little department should just go create their own access databases. One of the things I saw happen during that time was that people would create access databases. They'd go take a class somewhere and come back and build a database. And most of the time they were really bad, because the access class was teaching them how to use access. It wasn't teaching them how to design a database that was strong and would do what they wanted to do. And so they wasted a lot of their own time building this, and then they became the help desk for the product that they'd created, because that's what you get when you build something that outside of sort of the governance of the data in your organization. And then they invariably drifted off to somewhere else, because now they had two jobs. They had the job they'd had before they got volunteered to build the database, and they had the database job, and they were still only making the same amount of money, or even if they got a cool little bonus, they still had two full-time jobs. And so there are a lot of these little abandoned databases, some of them in Access. I'm most familiar with those because the clients I had used Access, but some of them in FileMaker Pro. I mean, these are good database products, but they could be used to create really great databases or really bad databases. And if you were hiring somebody to come in and do that, it wasn't always clear that you knew what they were going to build for you. If you'd had the skills internally, that would have been the wrong thing to, well, my belief system as a manager is that if we're trying to do something new and we have some existing work and therefore we don't have time to do both, that you hire somebody for the existing work, because you already know how to do that. You don't need to learn about that. I don't think you should pay other people to learn. I think if you're going to pay people to learn, it's best if they're your own people. Now, sometimes you need help, but I would not invest $500,000 in somebody else developing a system if I had a team of developers, because those people go away, and then you end up, right? You end up with these systems that truly nobody knows. It wasn't built here. And when we need to modify it, we just hope that those people are still around and don't want to charge us more. Or they're not so popular that they don't have time for us. I mean, that's what so I have a management philosophy about where you want to spend your monies. Mm-hmm. In terms of, bring in some experts, have them help your people, coach your people. But when the consultants leave, you and I have both been consultants, right? Both are consultants. When the consultants leave, if you ask, well, what did you get? If they go, I don't know, but we push this button, it's like, that's probably a wrong answer.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
Right. And some mm-hmm. consultants are comfortable walking away with a company really not understanding. I have learned that there are folks who are comfortable walking away with a company not understanding their own data, how their data is structured, what the risks are of modifying the data or a UI, all of those kinds of things. So, and then there are databases that so during Y2K, not all databases got updated. We all know this, but there are some industries that they chose that their databases are great big flat files. And the decision was that if we hadn't updated them since the 1960s, this was not a good time. And so they're the people who got there first. They're insurance agent, insurance companies, for example, have huge databases that still run in COBOL. Wow. The federal government is looking for COBOL developers right now.
Huh.
Seriously.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah,
like just when I thought it was safe, I'm one of them. I had a great time at Y2K, right? But some of that stuff has never been updated because the risk and the cost of updating it it's not warranted. That's not to say all insurance companies still run in COBOL, but I know for fact insurance companies do, and I know for fact that the federal government does, and some state governments do as well. There's a call right now for COBOL developers. You can find a course on developing in COBOL on LinkedIn, and it's a great language, by the way. It's a good, interesting place to start. It's a studied language, so there's still those data sets, right? And nobody, even if somebody owns them, John David, nobody can touch them. Nobody can fix them. So how do we get data out of those in a meaningful way? We use a tool like Power BI.
Wow. Nice way to kind of bring it all back together. So you mentioned LinkedIn just now. One of the main focuses of, our podcast was this first 6 months of 2020. We talked about 6 different facets of getting an analytics job. One of them is personal branding. And I wanted to get your insight as someone who has quite a bit of a following on LinkedIn. How can an entry-level analyst, or even if an analyst that's already got their first job or, mid-tier job, who's trying to get the next opportunity, how can they build a solid LinkedIn brand?
There's actually a course on this on LinkedIn Learning.
Oh.
So there's a course on how to successfully promote yourself on LinkedIn Learning. I'm not the expert on this. I hired somebody for a short period of time who helped me, gave me some feedback and did some specific things. I've benefited from the courses on LinkedIn Learning on how to better develop your social brand. I think for me, I probably have a big following because I have a fair number of courses, and I've been doing this for a while. And also before when I was doing corporate training, I was training tens of thousands of people. So I'd be surprised if I didn't see some of those people show up on LinkedIn as well, following me there. So some of it is just, some of it is this place I am in my job life, in my career, that a lot of people know me, and a lot of people have been in my courses. So that's, I think, probably accounts for my following more than anything I've done specifically to brand myself.
So I think that you and I are in kind of a different camp in that we're published on LinkedIn. So we're going to have kind of a natural wider breadth of connections. I think though it's a quality over quantity thing, especially for those looking to, find their next job opportunity. So,
oh, definitely.
So it's about connecting to the relevant people in your space.
So, okay. So thanks for reframing that for me, because yes, I have thousands of followers, but my assumption would be that they wouldn't necessarily be the place that I look for the next piece of work that I was doing. I do get work offers on LinkedIn, and you need to pay attention to that. And I think some of it is in terms of defining really carefully. What most people see about you on LinkedIn right away is that tagline that's underneath your name and underneath your photo. I'm always totally mystified when I see somebody who wastes that little tiny icon photo on their dog or a family picture where you can't, right? Okay.
Right.
So one thing is, and bother to get a semi-professional picture done, even if a friend's doing it for you, that shows you in a work setting if that's what it is you want. If you want more time at the beach, when I want more time at the beach, I actually change out my photo to me at the beach, which is kind of a nice thing too, and I think people get the idea, God, she spends a lot of time at the beach, which is my point, right? Don't call me right now. I'm not looking for clients.
Right.
But to make the best use of that tagline, and it should not be, I'm looking for work. It should really define what mine says right now is empowering people and teams. I mean, that's what I do. I don't just do business analytics. I spend a lot of time I'm actually, my SharePoint courses are really where I've been in LinkedIn for a very long time. I teach across the Power Platform. What my courses have in common for me is they're things that I'm interested in, and they're things that people are using for collaboration, whether you're building the ability for mobile workers to work in Power Apps, something like that, or you're designing, SharePoint document libraries, or you're doing data analytics and visualizations. All these things are of interest so I'm like real wide and, less deep than some people are.
So instead of, because I see that all the time, of currently seeking job opportunities, how would you reframe that? Like what should you put there instead of, basically advertising that they're unemployed or they don't have they're looking?
And to be blunt, 10 million more people are going to post that now. So how the hell are you going to stand out? We have 10 million more people out of work. So I think looking for work is probably like, if that was ever enough, it's not going to be enough now. Somebody whose tagline I read recently said, always open to my next, the word wasn't adventure, but always open to a new work experience. Not bad. Says the same thing and seems less desperate. But I think if somebody's looking for you, it's why are they looking for you? So mine starts empowering people and teams. Find my SharePoint, Power Platform, and Microsoft 365 courses on LinkedIn. What I do is I empower people and teams. That just went out of my head. The guy who used to teach SharePoint before me for LinkedIn, who's a brilliant instructor, I used to say I would listen to him read the phone book because he's got a fabulous voice. But his basically said, and I'm rephrasing it, I explain hard things in ways that make it easy for people to understand. It's like, is that a skill you would want to have in your workplace? If I were doing data,
visual storytelling,
go ahead.
Like maybe you could say something like, I tell stories with data. I'm a visual storyteller.
I tell stories with data. I can help. I help businesses tell their data stories.
Yeah. So something like that could kind of catch the eye and really draw them in.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a hard time to look in a generic way. I think you have to be more specific.
Right. And that kind of gets into like the aesthetics and the branding side of things. But okay. So number one, solid headshot. not a picture of your dog, not a picture of you at the beach.
Right.
Solid tagline. One other question I wanted to ask you about is, what are the value, and this is not just for the audience, this is for my personal insight too. What's the value of the LinkedIn Learning badges? Do you think that's a proof of actual knowledge? Like what do you think employers interpret that as?
Wow. There's a question. So I'm going to put myself sort of in the employer role, because I've been that many times in my life. So for fact, it's proof that you got all the way to the end of the course. I mean, you can't get that badge without getting all the way out to the end. So, well, people could cheat, I'm assuming. You could just set it on autoplay and walk away and go to the beach. If we were allowed to do that, which we're not right now. But if, at least not in Michigan, but if you could do that, there's always people who will cheat any system. So let's just assume that we aren't focused on who would do it badly. And I look and somebody has a badge for a particular course. That's going to tell me a lot of things. One of the things it tells me, particularly if they haven't been recently employed, is that they care enough to be learning. It is proof of learning. Okay. And that's huge. And it's proof of learning something specific. So if I took a look and people were learning specific things that would be helpful in the job that I have available, that would say a lot to me, as opposed to somebody who just was taking a course every week to check off, I took a course. But if I saw a cluster of things, if I was seeing, your Power BI course, my Power BI Essential Training course and Power BI Desktop, if I saw somebody doing, Helen Wall's Power BI course, and it's like, oh, here's somebody who's really focused on Power BI. And then maybe, Dennis Taylor has a great course on how to clean up your data in Excel. It's like, oh, they thought about that too. See what I mean? There's
so being proactive. They're going out and finding resources. So I think what that communicates is that you're not going to have to be a taskmaster with this person. They're going to go out and do the work. You're not going to have to constantly push them to say, go learn this, go do this.
Right. They're self-motivated. And there's one thing more that it says. The other thing that it says, in addition to they're self-motivated and they are making smart use of their time as a resource to learn new skills. But the other piece that's in there is, how many times do you have somebody who you hire and you discover that every new thing that they need to learn, you need to point them towards? I mean, I've hired people. I actually had a guy working here on the farm. This is just a tiny little story. I had a guy who was working here on the farm. I didn't hire him. Somebody else did. And he asked me, he came over, and his job, the task he'd been sent to do by somebody else, was to actually plant some seeds so that we could start germinating them. Okay. This is a really bad story. So he asks me when he gets here, and this is a project where basically we're providing land and water and nothing else. And he says, so how deep do I plant these seeds? And I looked at him and I said, you don't know? And he said, no. So I came in and I Googled, how deep do I plant these particular seeds? And I go out and I tell him, and I said, so you need to plant them 3/4 of an inch deep. And I had actually taken a pencil and marked 3/4 of an inch on a pencil. So I could say, if you stick it in this far, that's the hole to drop the seed in. He said, how did you know it was 3/4 of an inch? And I said, I Googled it. And he went, well, that's the difference between you and me. So
that's funny.
Right. So if I see a badge that somebody has taken courses, I know there's another difference between them and this guy, who, by the way, doesn't work for us anymore, for sure. There are some people who are self-starters, who are looking for solutions, and who are actually completing things. There's a difference between, I viewed 3 movies in 17 different courses to answer a particular question that I had, versus I wanted to study something so that I understood it. And that's what the badge is. That's different than the way, many of us use LinkedIn Learning to be able to answer an immediate question. I'll go to LinkedIn Learning and just search for, how do I do this? and it will take me to the right movie because they're all, there's closed caption and transcript. So I can search for particular things and find the right movie. But that's different than I want to take the entire course and learn something that's beyond just answering the question that I have right now. Both of them are valid ways to learn, but one of them ends up with a badge that says you've learned something specific.
You've done the work. Yeah, you've
done the work.
A to Z. Well,
yep. So proof of learning and proof of work.
Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate your time. I've got to wrap up because I got another meeting coming up. But thank you so much. Also, if you guys are still listening, check out her courses. They are fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Yours as well. Yours as well. It was good to get to know you more. I hope we do this again sometime, John David.
Yeah, of course.